so we're going to be using some Ardex X5 for the shower floor and actually all the towel installation over this WEDI subliner and WEDI shower system. It's one of my favorite thin sets, everyday thin set. You know, really, it has a really long pot life, so you can pretty much count on it to be lasting at least 3 hours anyways. That's most of my experience with it. It has a great non-sag quality to it, so it's great for walls. And then floors, it's obviously great for that as well. Now floors, you could go with something a little bit cheaper. I find it that you don't need as much as the high quality premium thin set for a floor, just because you're going to be using a leveling system, and you know, obviously wall tile likes to move. So being on the floor, you don't need to go super high end, but you know, if you're going to do a bathroom, I'll just buy, in a small bathroom like this, I'd probably buy 4 bags of X5 so I can do everything with it. So it's really highly important to measure everything. On the back of the bag, it'll give you instructions on water, but between 6 and 7 quarts, I'm going to go right in the middle, about 6.5. It's really important though to measure your water, because it really makes a difference. Making sure that you mix it correctly, because especially these new thin sets, you can't really just go by the eyeball anymore. It's really is a science at this point, so you want to stick with what they recommend. So 1 bag is probably going to do this entire floor area. So I'm just going to mix the whole thing here. So we're going to be doing these 7 by 20 inch plank tile. So this is actually going to be a really simple installation. We're going to go half pattern. So again, you want to just make sure how beveled it is. If you have a severe bend in it, you might want to go a 3rd pattern. You know, go every you know, an 8 inches rather than doing a half pattern, because if you're really bowed, it's going to be harder to get that lippage to straighten out in between each tile. So pay attention to the tile that you're installing. But since this is such a small bathroom, plank tile, I really do find to be one of the simplest patterns, because you know, it's kind of reflecting hardwood flooring to a certain extent. I mean, it's gonna be half pattern, so I'm gonna make sure that they all line up and everything's even that way. But when you're running the floor, it makes it pretty simple. So this bathroom, the width is 46 inches. I measured to the center to see exactly what I would end up with if I started my grout joint right on the center. And what I ended up with was a 1 inch piece on the other side. So that didn't work. So I measured to the center of my plank tile. And now I'm going to have basically a 5.5 inch piece on either side of the plank tile. So that works out great. The other thing you want to reference is where the doorway is. So just simply take your tile, leaving about a 1/16 inch gap in between. That's normally what I like to do. And then take a look at the size tile that are going to be at the doorway. Looks like I'm going to be cutting off about 2 inches worth of tile. So everything works out that great. So I could pretty much start from the shower floor, work my way back. So full piece, half tile, full piece, half tile. And then we'll have 2 cuts on the other side. Now, I'm using a laser to center this. It's not something that you have to purchase or do. But it does make it easier for sure, being able to just run a laser straight down the center, just measuring either location and then just following that laser. But something on a small bathroom like this, it's really not necessary. You can pretty much just kind of guide yourself off of the squareness of where your shower floor is going in. Now we're doing 36 inches from the back wall to the edge of our shower, so that we have a full 36 inch shower. Again, that's leaving us a 15 inch center from the toilet to the shower. And we're going to work our way out. It's always important when you're doing a curbless shower to always start with your outside floor tile first, because the thin set's going to be thicker. Your towel is most likely going to be somewhat thicker, and you'll be able to meet up that shower towel to the outside floor. So we've got our laser set, ready to start moving on our tile. So I referenced this mark here as my center mark of let me see here. Yeah, that's basically right where, that's a 36-inch. Yeah, 36-inch mark right there. So the other system that we're going to be using is the T-lock. You looking here? So we're going to be using Perfect Level Master. It's basically a wedge clip system. We're going to use this to keep our lippage in control. It also makes it a lot easier because it holds everything together. But you can get these clip sizes in different sizes. This is the 1/32 clips, but you can get them in 16th, 1/8 inch, whatever grout joint that you want to use. Now, I like smaller grout joints. I think they look nicer, so I always stay with it right around a 16th inch. Trowel size always depends on the coverage you're getting, but you know, typically a 1/4 by 3/8 inch square notch trowel or U-notch trowel like this is sufficient, but you do want to get bigger than a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. You want to go a little bit thicker so that you can make sure you have that bondage. Okay, so we'll just start here right in the middle and work our way over. So again, always using the flat side of the trowel. To burn this thin set into place. And you're better off to trowel on the short side of the tile so that it has a better chance of it, not a better chance, but a better bond, because the air will be able to escape out quicker. So we're going to go on the short side of that plank tile. My advice is not to get too far ahead of yourself. Don't spread too much out that you can't cover, because once this thin set kind of skins over, then you really can't, you have to scrape it off and put new stuff on now. You want to back butter all these, just using the flat side of the trowel to just comb that on. Then we want to put our clips in. If you finger the sides of these joints, that'll help keep that thin set from getting squished in between the clips. Not a bad idea to just reference your square against this. Just make sure that not too bad. Okay, you got 5 1/2. I'll just make it 5 1/4. There's no sense of being too. Plus, on the edges of your floor, you want to leave like a 1/4 inch reveal. So we'll just make it 5 1/4. So I know this cut around here is not that pretty, but it really doesn't matter because now I'm going to get that flange over top of there. It's going to cover that whole thing. So obviously it would have been nicer to be a little bit closer than that, but it really doesn't matter. Like I said, I always use the 32nd inch clips, and what I do is just kind of eyeball my joints. A lot of times, sometimes the tile on the edges aren't 100% square, so they kind of bevel out at the bottom. So then what you end up with, if you had a 16th inch grout spacer, it would end up making a bigger grout joint on the outside. So I recommend just getting 32nd inch clips, and then you can just gauge the gap with your eye. So we're going to use a Schluter Rondeck for our edging. So basically this just gets tiled in and makes a nice even joint here. So go ahead and put that down first. Now this is an interesting situation here because we're putting a barn door on the outside, so the door is going to be all the way out here. But I'm still going to leave it. I'm not going to go halfway. I'm going to keep it out a little bit even more, probably 2/3 of the way, just in case they ever decided they want to put a regular door on here. Not that I really foresee them doing that. I just don't want to bring the tile all the way out to the edge, because then if you ever did try to change the door, you're going to see tile on the outside of the door. Okay, so next morning you want to take all these clips out. You just hit them parallel with the grout joints. So just take a rubber mallet and hit these out. Now sometimes some of these things are these clips are not gonna break off cleanly, but I'll show you how to address that here shortly. But let's just get all these out of here. These things sticking out, you just basically just use a utility knife and just score them below the tile. Just needs to be below the tile surface, about an 1/8 inch. So just obviously be careful of your waterproofing when you're cutting that. Okay, so we're gonna set something up here to flood test this. So what I'm gonna do is just use a little bit of spray foam just on the entrance here, and then we can remove this after we do our flood test. Okay, so let's get that little drain piece out of there, the magnet, get that out of there. And then we're just gonna use a test plug. So we're just gonna tighten this. Just a rubber gasket that holds around there. And then we're gonna go ahead and fill it up. Now, some inspectors are gonna require almost like 2 inches of water in this pan. I don't think anybody's gonna give me a hard time about a curbless pan and just getting this filled up. Really the most important part obviously is just making sure it doesn't leak, but you're really just looking for air bubbles in areas that, you know, if your water level drops, then you have an issue. So in my mind, it doesn't really matter how much water, just as long as the whole pan is filled. And that's, you know, I think most people would agree with that. But if you had to make a bigger dam, I would just use a piece of WEDI board and then just span that across, seal it, let that dry for about a half an hour, and then fill it up. But all intents and purposes, I mean, I think this is a quicker and faster way to just block this off and test things. So yeah, this is pretty much hard now. So we'll go ahead and fill this pan up. So at this point, just measure down on top of your drain and mark that amount. So 1.25 inches. And what you want to try to look for is any air bubbles anywhere coming out. If you see any air bubbles, especially around the drain, that means that water's being released somewhere. So we'll let this sit for a couple hours. All right. Okay, so just take another measurement. Okay, we got 1.25 inches, so everything's good there. So now I'll just let everything out. And I would advise drying everything out before setting tile. Put a fan on this. You don't want the pan to be completely saturated like this when you're thin setting. Okay, so we're laying this out, and since we did 36, it actually works perfectly just from running it from the edge of your tile to the back wall. So we're even this way, but this way we're about 1 inch. So what I'm going to do is cut a 1/2 inch off of each side so that they're equal on either side of the pan. Always look on the back of the tile. You can see that this mesh is really light, which is good because now I know that I'm going to be getting a good bond to the actual tile. Sometimes this mesh is so glued down that you don't even see any of the tile, and that's usually a really bad manufacturer that creates that, because you want to see the ceramic. You want the thin set that bonds the actual ceramic. You don't want to be bonding just to glue. But the problem with this light coat is that it easily falls off. So I would not recommend running this through a wet saw, because everything's just going to kind of fall apart. So what I do is I just put a couple spare pieces of WEDI down, and I do all my dry cutting right here. So we'll just go ahead and cut a 1/2 inch off this entire side. And that'll give us an indication of how it's going to look on our drain. And we should be even on our side. With this tile, this is the same thickness as sitting on the pan. You can see that's about the same thickness as the tile. So once I get thin set under here, I'll probably need to raise this a little bit. But really, in all reality, you can move this drain cover like all the way to the side if you really needed to. You know, the whole concept of this drain is, what the reason it's floating is so that when water gets underneath of this, it'll have a way to escape. So basically, all these areas of the drain right here, here, is all the water can escape that way. So, you know, it doesn't really matter to a certain extent where it sits. You know, obviously it needs to be over the drain at some point, but obviously the way that they really want you to design it is to sit right in the center here. But, you know, you can move it over a 1/2 inch either way, and it's not going to make a difference as long as it can meet up with your tile okay. Let me cut a 1/2 inch off of this side. Okay, so for the shower floor, we're going to use some rapid set because I want to be able to actually tile the walls a little bit later today as well. So we're going to use Mapei's Ultra Flex RS. That's rapid set. I'm only going to need about a 1/2 bag. Actually, that's probably going to even be too much for the shower floor, but it's easier to mix 1/2 bags than anything else and getting the right ratio. We're going to be setting the tile with 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch square notch trowel. And so always pay attention to the back of the bag on how much water is needed. It says between 5 and 6 quarts per bag. So we're going to go about around 5.5 for water. So that would be what, 2 1/2, 2 3/4 of water. So make sure you get a measuring bucket, measure it out. Again, really important for accuracy here. And then to even be a little bit more accurate, we're going to use this scale. So it's 50 pounds. $23. So pretty close. Let's add a little bit more water here. Well, at least that gives you a good indication of how much water to put with this. Go ahead and apply our thin set. This is a little bit on the wet side, so I would recommend that for floor tile, especially mosaics like this. Keep it a little bit, you know, like that was 5 to 6 quarts we used right in the middle, 2 3/4 but even if you went with the full 6 quarts, that's not a bad idea either, because if this is really dry, and I've had issues before where I tried to make the mix too thick and it just didn't bond to the tiles properly. And it's really important on a shower floor, because once water gets through there, it needs to have a good bond to the pan with the thin set. So first thing is to take the back side of the trowel and burn it into the substrate. And again, what this does is makes it easier to get nice trowel lines, but it also makes sure that you're embedding this well to it. Now, one important detail I got to do right now that I'm just about to forget with the WEDI sealant. This is a really critical point to the whole system of a curbless shower, and that is to separate this thin set layer right at the edge of the tile. Okay, so then this is very simple, but it's a very important concept, and that is just to separate this thin set layer. So I'm just going to take a generous bead of WEDI sealant and go right along the edge of this tile. And it's just as simple as that. That's separating that thin set layer. So now water is not going to siphon into the thin set layer and get outside of the shower. That's really all you got to do. You know, and the joint sealant, the joint sealant does, you know, the thin set will bond to this. But you could use silicone as well. Just don't, if you use silicone, you're just really wanting to just get that joint. Because you don't want to, boy, that's really, it's because I'm wet here. So I might just leave it as a bead.
You have to let it dry?
No, this will dry on its own. You don't necessarily have to let this caulking dry before you set it. There you go. Okay, so then get some off that tile surface there. You know, and if you leave some of this stuff on there, you just use a little bit of acetone to get that off of there a little bit later. That might be what I'll have to do there. Okay, so that's all you really have to do there. The better you have your trowel lines, the better or the easier it's going to be to get a nice flat floor. So take your time spreading the thin set. Start from our front, because that's going to be our most important joint. It's meeting this up with the front. So I'm just going to lay these all out, and then I'll tamp them after I kind of get them set. So this tile is going to meet up pretty nicely with this because of the thickness of it, but if it was thinner, you would have to add a little bit of thin set underneath this where it meets your outside floor. But the way this is, the way this thickness is going to work, we don't really have to do any build up, which is kind of nice. This is not going to be very forgiving, especially with it being kind of like a white tile, because you're going to be using some gray grout in this. So it's actually going to really accent these joints a little bit more. Okay, so then once you get it down into the place, then you can just take your grout float and then really push them in. On this drain, I'm going to put some thin set all corners of this. Okay, so we're just going to put that right up against that tile. Okay, so what we'll do is just use some shims to hold this up until that thin set dries. On this other side, I can just pretty much push it straight down to the floor. So, but you can see I'm off center of my drain. So, you know, it's not a big deal. As long as I can service this, you know, as long as I can get something in there, that's fine. So, you know, it's kind of nice that you have the flexibility to move this drain around, even if it's not 100% centered exactly the way you want it. But I wanted to avoid small slivers against my drain. That's why I'm kind of moving this over that way. Hours and then we can start working on the walls.